Well, thank you, Dwight, for that introduction. And we're going to talk about Maryland public education. And we have Corine Frank and Kerry Gillespie, who have been very involved on school board issues in Maryland. So welcome to our show. Could you first, of course, Corine, you're speaking in your unofficial capacity here as not as a school board member, but somebody sort of independent about that. Could you kind of just elaborate a little bit on your role on that?
Sure. So 2 cycles ago, we realized I'm the former executive director of the Maryland Republican Party. I talked to Chairman Durkheer and I said, you know what, we really should be focusing on these Board of Education races. So in my role at the state party, I kind of got looped into the need for winning school board races. And then the following cycle, I realized not only is there a need for school board candidates, there's a need for all of the apparatus that goes along with supporting candidates. So I created a PAC. It's called the Maryland Alliance for Parents and Students. And this last cycle was the first time that we had our PAC up and running. Because I'm actually on the school board, I am not able to continue as the chairman in that capacity. So I handed that role over to Kerry Gillespie, who has been just an amazing parent and fighter for parents' rights. So in the capacity now for the PAC, she has been taking the reins. But the original vision of that was really to support and endorse candidates who understood the parental rights movement, who wanted to get back to classical education. And it's been a really successful first run, and we hope to continue that under Kerry's leadership.
So we sort of have the vision statement there. So Kerry, a little bit more. MAPS is, I guess, the shorthand name for the organization. So tell me what the organization has been up to.
It is. So I'm very excited to be involved with it and all of Corine's efforts on the back end, getting this organization started. I became involved because, as she mentioned, I have been out there advocating as a parent, as a former candidate for delegate here, because I feel like there is a huge need to look at our education system and really look at what's happening in our schools and the return on investment, and making sure that we make some changes at the local, especially the Board of Education level, to make sure we're on the right track for our children and for our school system. So with MAPS, that's our goal, is we want to make sure that we are looking at strategic key seats throughout the state and in our counties to make sure that we're getting really good, strong candidates that we are running for these Board of Education seats that can hopefully join together, because not only do they influence each specific county, but they actually can influence the entire state as a whole in the educational program. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the boards of education can network and work with one another and rely on one another for some of these pushes. And what you'll often see, and we've seen this throughout the state as well, is that there may be one specific push, whether it be a curriculum or policy-wise push in one county that then we can perhaps bring to another county as well. But we have to have the support with the Board of Education members.
So it's really kind of interesting in the last couple of years that boards of education have really become much more high-profile positions, and the intensity level on one side or another has raised considerably. How has that affected what you're involved in? I assume it's provided that much more engagement than you might otherwise have had for boards of education races.
Yeah, just to give some perspective, when I ran in 2020, I would go around to counties in my role as ED, and I begged people to run for these seats. We could not recruit a lot of candidates in that first 18 to 20 cycle. And it really showed with, the lack of enthusiasm. We just did not have the interest in these races that we have now. So now fast forward a couple of years, and these are really the seats that people who want to affect change are focusing on, because it relates so closely to your home and your family. So these are the seats that people are really becoming passionate about. So you're seeing a lot of different things happen because of that. You're seeing a lot of fighting over the seats as far as politics goes. You've got a lot more people filing for these seats. You've got a lot more people campaigning for these seats. The second piece is there's a lot more money coming into candidates in these seats. So there's a couple of sort of natural progression of what happens when you have elected members and you have campaigns that are being run, and there's more scrutiny to those candidates.
So I assume, I mean, one of the things that's kind of interesting is in Maryland, about half the budgets at various county levels are for the boards of education. And so we sort of see what the county councils do, and they have their half, but then it's the board of education that has the other half of the responsibility. It sounds like people are kind of waking up to just how much of the services that local government provide are being provided by education, for education.
This is something that I concentrated on greatly when I had conversations outdoors with people, was, you know, saying to them, look, even if you are, maybe you're older, your children are grown, maybe you don't have children in the school system, we really need to look at what is the return on investment and where are your tax dollars going? And when we have seen this huge learning regression that unfortunately we suffered post-COVID in our education system, especially in Maryland, since we took so long to put our children back into schools, that you've still got this increase of tax dollars going into the school system, but where is it actually going? And that's something that is really important. I know that's something that we're looking at, especially in Anne Arundel County heading into this election. Let's really have transparency, make sure that the money is getting into the classrooms, to the teachers and to the students who need the money, rather than staying at an administrative level.
And just to kind of throw in another topic on that, as I've talked to parents, and I'm trying to recruit board members, and in my campaign 4 years ago, when I'm talking to people at their doors, a couple of people have said, well, I have kids in private school. Maybe they're actually private school parents or homeschool parents. And I said to them, if you're paying tuition for private school, if you could get everything that school offered at public school for what you're already paying in your taxes, wouldn't you send your child? And originally they would say, well, it's not my fight, it's not my battle. But then when you present it like that, well, hey, you are actually paying for something that you can't utilize because it's not meeting you where your needs are. They start to think about it a little differently. And I think that the message that Kerry brought up is one that we should try to really sort of expand on, not just grandparents, not just people who have graduated, but anyone who is buying into a system that isn't supportive of their what they need as far as being a part of the community.
It does seem that we referenced sort of this pivot that took place in 2020 as people became more aware. I mean, one of the drivers, correct me if I'm wrong, seemed to be during COVID, there was much more exposure to what was contained in the curriculum, how the schools were operation, A, and B, much more frustration about or considerable frustration when the schools chose not to open. Is that the hinge that took place?
It definitely was for me as a parent. So I have 4 children, and I have always been an advocate for the public school system. My mom was a teacher, but and I was always an involved parent. I was in the PTA, I was in the classrooms. And so I was there and I thought I knew what was going on, but really not until COVID did I actually know what was going on. And I think it was a combination of having our children at home behind a Chromebook, where we actually saw and heard a lot of what was going on in the schools, but also combined with, I do think that there was an extra push, an extra nudge with some of these more philosophies that to me don't have a place in the education system. They're deterring and distracting from what our kids should be learning, which are the core basic subjects, which they are falling more behind. And the question that I've always asked is, well, if we have if we have extra time to have these discussions about, say, gender ideology or Black Lives Matter, or some of these more ideological philosophies, where are you finding the time to do that? Because our kids are so behind in math and in reading and in science. And when you look at the MCAP scores for the past several years, they were on a downfall already, a downfall trajectory before COVID. But after COVID, they just took the plunge off the cliff. And so I do think it was a combination of the two things: parents being aware of what was going on, and then more being pushed onto children post-COVID.
And part of that was not just that parents were seeing now lessons in their living room, they were also tuning into board meetings to see when masking would be over and in-person learning would be, would happen. People started to actually watch those meetings. So in between those very hot button issues, you still had your DEI policies coming down and you still had your SEL policies coming down. So parents were like, well, hey, we're not even back in school. Why are we talking about all of these things?
Absolutely.
So they started to kind of get a taste of what the school board was actually doing too.
So we've talked about sort of this pivot that took place in 2020 during COVID and sort of the awareness and familiarity with what's happening in both at the boards themselves, but also in the classroom. Now, on the other side, there seems to be a raised intensity. There's a sort of a demonization on many parents who've become active. And whereas it used to be this idea that you wanted the parents to be involved, you wanted to get them engaged. This was the sort of, how shall I say, the gold standard of a school was to have engaged, involved, active parents. We seem to go like 180, where if parents are asking the wrong questions or questioning, there's this huge pushback and real demonization. Have you experienced that?
Yes, absolutely. And, I've stood before our Board of Education and I've said many times, study after study has shown the more parental involvement there is in a child's education, the better the outcome. And these are nonpartisan studies. These are studies from, some of what some people would consider very leftist organizations. I mean, these studies show parents need to be involved. And unfortunately, there was, I think, again, we saw during COVID, a rush of people who were trying to keep parents from speaking out. There was a combined effort between teachers unions and unfortunately our current administration to silence parents and to label them as domestic terrorists if we dare to go before our school boards. I have been definitely treated very poorly for speaking before my school board. I have been assaulted. I have been called names. I have had to have police escort me to my vehicle. And some of this treatment has been by some within our county teachers unions. So I can tell you there definitely is a concern and an issue with parents who are trying to speak out. There are some parents who are intimidated by it. Luckily for me, it just emboldens me and it makes me want to fight even more. And this is something that I think too, to circle back to MAPS and how we can be useful with this. I think this is something that if we get more people onto school boards who recognize the need for parental involvement, that we can have these discussions with how to get parents involved to make them feel safe and make them feel that their voices are heard and a vital part of the discussion. Because I can tell you in Anne Arundel County, under our previous superintendent, there was always a lot of discussion about teachers and students and the importance of them, but never, ever did I hear about the importance of parents or getting parents involved. I'm starting to see a little bit of a turn in that in Anne Arundel County with our new superintendent, and he is recognizing and including parents in some of the decision making. But I think it needs to be stepped up and go a little bit further. After all, at the end of the day, we're the ones that are funding the systems. Right. So we should have a vital role. And again, the ultimate goal of our education system should be the best outcome, the best education for every single student, and to push them to their fullest capability. And unfortunately, we have gone so far away from that. And that's something that with MAPS that we're trying to get focused back on, is to make sure that the focus is there on the core subjects and educating our children.
Yeah, and so just to give another little viewpoint of the parental rights movement, I think systems always encouraged parents to join the PTA and help with the fundraising side of education. But as soon as parents stepped into the curriculum and extra program side and ideological side, that's when you really started to see the pushback. You can fundraise and help support the school in that way, and you're always welcome to do that. But as soon as you disagree with certain policies, then it becomes much harder to have a voice. So I did kind of want to say that, that is the distinction. Parents who were involved in the past generally weren't involved in this piece of it. So the interest for parents to come join PTAs and help fundraise and, volunteer at the door is still always there and still very encouraged. It's just this one side. And Kerry and I both, in our different times of our fights, have walked through protesters, and it's a very uncomfortable atmosphere for a lot of people, and I think it's intentionally from the top. So.
And that's a really good point that Corine made. I actually heard Randy Weingarten, who is head of one of the two largest teachers unions in the country, state this weekend. I believe it was on Meet the Press. She was interviewed, and they were asking about parental involvement and parental rights in education. And she said, parents, they're always welcome. They can join the PTA. And I thought, well, we did for years, and look at where it's gotten us. So Corine hit the nail on the head with that. That's exactly where our place is to them, is in providing the funds to them and providing the extra labor in schools to them that they need without paying for, because we spend thousands of hours volunteering in these schools. Unfortunately, they want our money, and we should sit down and shut up from there. We should not have a voice in the process. And they actually think that they know our children better than we do. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm here to say nobody knows our children better than Corine knows her children, and I know my children. Nobody knows our children better. And when it comes to educating them, we should have a say in the process as well.
So I do want to make another distinction really quick. There are a lot of board members who don't believe that. There are a lot of board members who want public comment and who are interested in hearing from parents. I'm saying more from a system side and more from the way that things have been done up until now kind of point.
Absolutely. And I feel like from a union perspective, I guess was my point. That's kind of that's how parents felt, especially during COVID, when we pushed to get our kids back into schools. The unions were telling us no, and this is why, and we don't want you involved in the process in deciding that. And so we were saying, look, our kids are hurting. They're struggling emotionally, mentally, and their education is slipping. But it seemed like they didn't want to hear from us.
I can recall as a parent in Montgomery County getting at the beginning of the year a stack of contracts that on each of the various programs, and we'd have to sign and fill it out. But it was always struck me that it was sort of on one-sided, what we were going to do and less what the school was going to do. But it underscored the kind of, how shall I say, one-sided nature sometimes that you did a great job of describing with the way PTAs, the preference for PTAs for funding over actual involvement.
Absolutely. And, I want to say again, there are amazing school board members, there are amazing teachers, and I support them 100%. Those are the types of people that we need in our school system, because they're the ones that are going to write the course, help us write the course, and they're the ones that are going to partner with us and make sure that our children are getting what they need and getting this amazing education that I know we can give them in this country.
So let me just turn a little bit to more specifically in Maryland, or more broadly on Maryland. As a result of the blueprint, the Kirwan Commission recommendations, a lot more funding is going to be coming into to schools across, depending, it's different amounts and different requirements by individual counties. Now, in Anne Arundel County, how is Kirwan impacting what you guys do?
You're going to be the expert on that with funding.
So I don't want to cross any lines into what I do as a school board member, because I'm definitely not representing the school board in this particular conversation. So I'm just trying to be very careful there. I will just sort of broadly let you know that statewide, Kirwan is looking at over $1 billion deficit by, I think, FY25 or FY26. It's like $1.6 billion structural deficit already. They kind of understood when they passed it that at some point they were going to hit a cliff, but it's coming way faster than they thought. So you see things like all of the ESSER funding is coming to a cliff at this point. You see things like required COLAs for teachers, required starting salaries for teachers. So what you're seeing county by county is the counties having to basically step up to these what are unfunded mandates, essentially. So you're seeing each county's allocation of resources go more and more broadly into their school board budget.
And we did in Anne Arundel County, for example, we did just have a large increase in the school budget that passed. The ESSER funding that Corine referred to was given to, throughout the state, well, in all the states from the federal government, if the states followed certain COVID related rules and mandates. They had a huge influx of cash from the federal government as well. So, between that and then Kerwin, looking at it's probably going to be challenging to fund it. I think there are some concerns there. However, I think it's important that we look at, I mentioned this before, but where is the money actually going into our school system? I have met so many teachers who, they're the ones purchasing the supplies for their classrooms. And I know as a parent, I have a list that grows year after year with what I have to purchase for my child who is in public schools for her classes. So I do wonder where the funding is going. I do wonder how effective it is. And is it really getting into the classrooms where it needs to be?
Well, approximately 74% of the operating budget goes to salaries for the 14,000 employees. So salary is a huge piece of that. And the Kerwin blueprint is requiring more of the salary component. So it will be a larger piece of that pie.
And is that number including administrative from a level of like the superintendent's office level?
Yes. So approximately 74% of the budget.
So one of the challenging issues this year, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot again, but was in the legislature was a push and pull about a number of education issues, but we'll start first with a push and pull that took place on the role of school boards in implementation.
HB 19.
Yes. We're very familiar with that.
Yes, I'm sure you are. Now there was a fairly active pushback for that. So just why don't you just explain what that was and what happened to that? And then we'll ask, is it going to come up again?
Don't say that, Mark. Please don't give him any more ideas.
Unfortunately, I'm concerned it's not going anywhere. So HB 119, it actually had a Senate bill that was basically the same equivalent to it, but it was championed by Superintendent Mohammed Chowdhury with our General Assembly. Basically what it did was initially was going to force what the Maryland State Department of Education has created called the Health Education Framework. And it's a large document. It was distributed to all of the counties. And because it was a framework, initially it wasn't going to be mandated to the counties to implement. HB 119 would have mandated the health education framework and would have forced the counties to each adopt this into their curriculum. What was included in HB 119 that I had concerns about was some of the gender ideology lessons that would start for the pre-K program, and then some very explicit sexuality lessons starting at the middle school level. The other concern with HB 119 was it was going to take away our rights as parents, as voters on a county level. We elect our county boards of education. We do not elect our state board of education. We do not elect the superintendent. That is done, that they are put into their roles by the General Assembly. So what this would have done was force our counties to adopt this framework, taking the control away from them and from us, who elect our boards of education to create the curriculum, because right now the counties create the curriculum and implement the curriculum in our schools. So it would have taken our rights away as voters. And we also saw a big pushback from the state association, which works with the boards of education. They also pushed back against this because they realized that it was going to take away their rights as Board of Ed members to make these decisions at the county level. It did pass the General Assembly as far as from the delegate side. Luckily, it did not pass on the Senate side, but we'll see what happens going forward. There are a lot of questions right now with our superintendent and whether his contract is going to be renewed. There are a lot of transparency issues there. Everything from we saw at the state level some changing or altering of test scores that were put out online, to some allegations that there was some texting going on that was not above board or that was deleted. So there are some questions there as far as to whether or not Superintendent Chowdhury's contract is going to be renewed. But if it's not, I can see him probably in the future working closely with the General Assembly to try to continue to push for this.
Yeah, Kerry and I, we went down to, and a couple of friends that we had, the Anne Arundel County Board of Education opposed this bill publicly. MABE, the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, publicly opposed this bill. So Kerry and I went down, we had these documents with us, we put them on desks to our elected delegates and all of the folks in the General Assembly. Even though all of these organizations opposed HB 119 for taking local control, every Democrat in the Anne Arundel delegation still supported it. Mm-hmm. Every Republican, of course, voted against it. HB 119 passed the House, but it failed in the Senate. So it is really concerning that so many of our elected officials just did not want to hear sort of the concerns of all of the people within these organizations who understand how this is going to be affecting them. They just voted for it anyway. It was unbelievable.
I would encourage people to go back and watch the testimony actually on HB 119 before the General Assembly. I was one of the parents who testified against it. When you look at the people who testified for it, it was a bunch of people who ran NGOs about different things from child rape or child pregnancy or different things like that. And so you have to kind of think about why are they here? And like I actually asked Delegate Attleberry when I testified, I said, why are we putting this through right now? Why is this the concentration and how is it going to improve the education of our children? Because I don't hear any of these people testifying for that. And I can tell you that the parents who came out against it were treated extremely poorly by the Democrats on our General Assembly. We were treated as though we were on trial for, a crime, a horrible crime. I mean, we were interrogated, we were spoken down to, we were treated very poorly. And I think this goes back to your point earlier about parental involvement and, parents coming before school boards. We can't even have elected representatives treat us with respect in the state of Maryland, unfortunately, from the Democrat side. Luckily, we have some great partners on the Republican side who fight like heck every day for us, but there's only so much they can do when, you've got the supermajority in the House of delegates like you do. But it's very difficult to go before your General Assembly, your elected representatives, and be treated like that.
And that's not the first time for you.
No, it's not. It won't be the last, I'm sure.
We certainly have an ongoing thing. Now, let me just go back to there is something of a soap opera as we speak going on about the status of the superintendent, Mohammed Chowdhury. As you referenced, there has been a lot of news coverage. I won't put you on the spot to go through all of it, but particularly Channel 45, Fox 45 in Baltimore has done a great job. So there was an issue where test scores were pulled offline and changed, he was called out on that, and there was some back and forth on that. And the latest is, of course, this issue of whether or not he was using a secrecy app to communicate with staff, and he denied it was true. And then I guess the news channel had texts to be able to establish that. So his contract, as I understand, as I recall, needs to be, if he's going to be renewed, they need to complete it later this month. Is that about right?
Yep, that's accurate.
So we're sort of waiting to see whether or not that happens. And I will say it was fascinating. There was a statement from Governor Moore, I think in May, which I wish I had the exact same language, but it was a cautious statement that there ought to be more transparency and better communication. He acknowledged that the board, let me be clear, he acknowledged that the state board is independent and not under the governor's jurisdiction. That said, that there ought to be more transparency and better communications. And I thought at the time that if ever there was a wink and a nod to the Board of Education, that maybe they ought to reconsider things. I won't put you on the spot by commenting on that, but it's certainly interesting to see how the state board responds with his contract going forward.
Well, with Maryland Alliance of Parents and Students, we are going to be releasing a statement. We have a couple of other community partners throughout the state that we're going to be releasing a statement with. I can tell you we've also been on the forefront of calling for answers to some of these questions over the last several months. We've partnered, and tried to get both some people on the delegate side, some people on the Senate side to provide statements and questions, because I can tell you the Republicans in the General Assembly are concerned about this. Unfortunately, what we saw from the reporting on Fox 45, they reached out to the Democrats in the General Assembly, and there was no response from them. I was happy to hear Governor Moore's questions about transparency, because I share the same concerns, both as a parent and as chair of MAPS. I can tell you that, I think transparency is the minimum that we should expect. And actually, even predating the changing of the test scores, there was a lack of release of the test scores. We were testing our kids this last year for MCAP, and we didn't even have the results of the previous year's scores yet. And, I actually, again, stood before my Board of Education and I said, why are we repeating this insanity? Why are we testing our children? And we're supposed to take those test results and assess where we need to make improvements or changes for going forward for the next school year, but yet we don't even have the results from the previous year. How is that helping? It's taking time away, valuable instruction time away from our teachers and in the classrooms. And yet we're continuing to do the testing. So first we had a delay in the test results being released. Then they were released and they were abysmal. We had 23 schools in Baltimore with 0 children proficient in math. And when Fox 45 called attention to this, that was when we saw the test scores then disappear off the website. So this is a pattern that's been going on since Superintendent Chowdhury took the helm at MSDE. And I think enough is enough, frankly. And transparency, again, that is the minimum that we should expect from him.
And I have the quote from Governor Moore. I just pulled it up while we were chatting. He said, "I want transparency, I want accountability, and I want a superintendent that believes in it and can deliver it. The results we are seeing right now are not satisfactory results, and I demand better. And we need to make sure that we are getting better results for our kids." So that is some strong language coming from, our governor. Now, having said that, I hope that he doesn't want ultimately.
There was an earlier sentence where he acknowledged in that quote where he says, I understand you're all independent, but, and then the statement, it's a pretty strong statement. I agree.
Very strong. Now, hopefully this doesn't lead to him getting more control over our state schools, so that it does have some autonomy, because you're always worried about that when you have these sort of power struggles in a vacuum that is, possibly to occur. So hopefully that's not going to be the case, but very interesting from the governor.
And hopefully that puts a little pressure onto the General Assembly to actually take some action, because unfortunately, again, the Democrats in the General Assembly have shown little to zero interest or concern about any of this. And Superintendent Chowdhury does make over $300,000 a year in his capacity. I mean, as a taxpayer, again, I'm wondering, not only is he not transparent, but he's actually not accountable. And when people try to ask him questions, he has literally on camera walked out of the room and shut the door and locked it inside a building that we pay for at the Maryland State Department of Education. So, definitely there needs to be some changes. There needs to be some answers, and there needs to be an investigation, frankly.
And it's interesting. It isn't just Fox 45 that's covered this. The Washington Post did a rather exhaustive. I mean, when they listed the number of people that they had interviewed, it was scores of people that they had interviewed at the Board of Education, in education in general within Maryland, and chronicled what they described as a toxic work environment, and then took a variety of quotes. And so I have to say, it's always interesting. It's one thing to say, well, it's just Fox in Baltimore, but when the Washington Post weighs in with such extensive coverage, it really is something that probably ought to be paid attention to.
Yeah, I saw some of that, and it was fascinating. If if the Washington Post reports, there's a toxic work environment and these texts that are being released are true, I mean, it really corroborates what the Washington Post was reporting. So it's unfolding. It's a fascinating story, and there's sort of multiple levels coming through. So it is interesting to watch, and we'll see where it lands.
Now, just shifting gears a little bit, we had a conversation with a candidate for Board of Education who's a former delegate. You can go on YouTube and see who it was. But not in Anne Arundel County, in another county.
Which county?
Howard. Yeah. So one of the conversations. No secrets. It was Trent Kittleman. I was probably being way too coy because we did the show just last week. But, Trent had an interesting observation. Obviously, she brings the perspective of a delegate who is involved in many of these decisions. And now she's planning, I don't think she's exactly announced, but planning to run for Board of Education in Howard. And she talked a little bit about the autonomy or the role of counties and kind of described there's sort of all the counties in Maryland, and then there's the city of Baltimore. And there's always there. She described the kind of tension of just how, frankly, dysfunctional the city's Board of Education is, and as a sort of driver for the state to try and get more involved, to get more engaged, because obviously there's a real desire to turn things around, but that same set of process can end up obviously adversely impact school boards of education or boards of education in other counties that perhaps are not struggling to the extent that Baltimore. How much of a phenomenon do you see that?
So I want to weigh in on this. If they really wanted to turn things around in Baltimore, so this was the first time Baltimore City has ever had a school board election. And they only had 3 seats available. And it's a very large school board. So while the state might be saying they're trying to effect change, they're really not pushing back when their ability to enact legislation. I know in Anne Arundel County in 2017, the legislative assembly, the General Assembly in that legislative session totally revamped how our board in Anne Arundel was going to be created. And it went from a fully appointed board to a fully elected board. They could do that in one fell sweep. They chose not to. They only allowed a few seats to be elected on the Baltimore City School Board. If they really wanted to enact change, they could make the entire thing an elected process.
And within, as I recall, within the Kerwin blueprint, there is a sort of process independent of the State Board of Education that is to review the implementation. Now, I'm not quite sure how
the accountability.
Right. I'm not sure how broad their remit is. It just to implementation, or does it look beyond that? Although, again, reading, I gather there has been some tension between Ike Leggett, who chairs that group, and the board. Can you elaborate on what their role is and what their process is?
Not a whole lot, to be honest. I don't know too much. I know a couple people who are on the AIB, but their work has started pretty recently. So I think to some extent, they're kind of building that plane as they fly it, to use a term that we use through COVID all the time. But since we went back to Blueprint, I do want to make one point that I didn't make last time. When we talk about the Blueprint and Kerwin, what we're really talking about is something that we tried back in the early days in Maryland, which was the Thornton legislation that went through. It's a program that's enacted. It's a package created by the state. It's funded through different means. It's basically an unfunded mandate. Thornton went away pretty quickly because it was understood. We went into a recession, and we understood that we just do not have the ability to fund this. We're going through the exact same process again, the exact same road that we traveled last time. We're now starting to see higher interest rates, all of the signs of a recession. We're looking at a $1.6 billion potential deficit. I don't know that Kerwin is going to stand the test of time. And I believe that it will very likely be a Thornton 2.0. And I've talked to some state board members who have had the same thought.
And you remember when it was implemented under Governor Hogan, we had a huge tax surplus. and now we're headed into, this huge deficit. So there's definitely been a shift in the wind.
Yeah, and it was clearly not particularly well thought out when they constructed it.
Although it's arguable that actually Thornton had more accountability processes in place. That said, when they kind of ran into some performance issues, the state tended to back off from taking action that could have been taken during Thornton.
And I think you and I have talked about this, haven't we? I think you were kind of explaining some of the accountability process and how it kind of changed over Thornton, and then it just kind of quietly died in the night. Refresh me on that, please, because I don't remember.
There were some provisions that allowed for the state to take action if there weren't improvements, and during the process, the state kind of backed off from actually taking action. And it did seem, and again, I may be being fast and loose, but I think the perception was that Kerwin had less of those kinds of benchmarks in place to be able to track performance. Although there is, as you described, this group that is generally responsible there. I don't think they're as clear in the benchmarks that they have going forward.
Yeah, at the end of the day, when you have an unfunded, explained program, and it doesn't matter if you have the ability to sort of bite into it if you don't have the gumption to do so. So, if they're able to do certain things and don't, there's no point in having it. So if it goes the same trajectory as Thornton and we run into that, then it doesn't matter if they have the power to do it if they don't actually do it.
So we're coming up on the end of the show, but I just wanted to give you a last plug. I guess I'll turn to you, Kerry. And how do people get in touch with MAPS, and how do they access the resources that you're providing?
Absolutely. Well, we'd love everyone to come visit us. You can find us on Facebook under Maryland Alliance of Parents and Students, or on our website, MAPS, MAPSBOE.com. We would love to get as many people involved as we can throughout the entire state. We are actively going to be supporting candidates. We are going to be helping train them. We will be endorsing candidates. We will be possibly doing mailers for candidates. So we need all the support we can get. As I'm sure you're aware, it is not cheap to run a campaign, and we need to come out strong and support these conservative candidates. I firmly believe, as a parent and as chair of Maryland Alliance of Parents and Students, that this is how we right our country. This is the core focus where it should be in our country, is on getting these conservatives onto school boards throughout the state of Maryland. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. So we need all the support we can get. So please visit our website. Any donations you can provide would be wonderful and appreciated. And they will all be going to support these wonderful candidates that we find throughout the state.
And just to plug onto that, under Kerry's chairmanship, there was a conservative education leadership conference already in March. So when she says that this PAC is training candidates, that work has already begun. There were candidates trained. There were a lot of folks in the building. There were a lot of potential candidates who kind of got a sense of what this was going to entail. And this work has already started. And, folks are really, we're getting a lot of great feedback from people who are interested in boards now.
Absolutely. And we want to continue these relationships too. Once we find these candidates with MAPS, we want to continue the relationships so that they know that they're going to have support throughout the state and throughout the counties and through MAPS. Because I'm sure Corine can tell you, when you get onto a school board and you're only hearing a lot of times one side over and over again before a school board, it can become challenging, I'm sure, to stick to your guns and to recognize and to really remember why you ran for that position. And so to have these relationships throughout the counties through MAPS is going to be essential to making changes and to keeping these seats.
Yeah, and Governor Ehrlich was the keynote speaker. He knocked it out of the park. He is an amazing partner. And, thank you so much to Governor Ehrlich for the time that he took for us that day too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. We really appreciate joining us and hearing about the progress that you've made.
Thank you.
Thank you.